Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our Tending the E&M Fields Using Time for Level of Service Q&A Activity webinar. My name is Ashley Decoto, and I am a specialist with our Provider Outreach and Education team. On the call with me today is my friend and colleague, Leanne Foster, who will be helping out with the chat. This webinar is part 2 of our 2-part series on choosing your level of service using time for evaluation and management services. Yesterday, Leanne held the part 1 webinar, which provided kind of a more comprehensive overview on using time for level of service. If you were not able to attend that session yesterday, the recording will be available within the next week or so, and that will be in the training center of our website and also on our YouTube channel. We will also have a recording of this session available in the training center on our website, and Leanne will be adding a link for the training center to the chat. And it will be there on our website for the next 60 to 90 days, barring any technical issues with the recording. And you can actually access that one without having to access YouTube, as we do recognize that not everyone is able to access YouTube at work. The recording will also be available on our YouTube channel, and it will stay there as long as the information remains relevant and current. All right, one more thing. Also in our training center, you can find a copy of today's presentation. So if you haven't already grabbed that, it is still available for download in case you'd like to have that to follow along or maybe to take notes, though it's not required. We are taking questions through the chat today, which again, Leanne will be monitoring. And I will check in with Leanne at the end of the presentation, time permitting, for any unanswered questions in the chat. We did have some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, and I will be answering those throughout the presentation today. If for some reason we do not get to live chat questions, which I don't suspect will be the case, we will answer any questions in a follow-up email. All right, for our agenda. So we'll start off by doing a brief recap from Leanne's part 1 webinar yesterday. After that recap, most of our session will be the interactive Q&A activity, and then lastly, I'll share a few resources. This 2-part series does focus on choosing your level of service using time. Leanne and I have multiple series scheduled in the coming months, which will kind of drill down into other aspects of level of service. We'll have a series on medical decision making at the end of this month, and then over the summer, we're breaking down each element of medical decision making into its own series. So stay tuned to our live events page for registration to open up, and then if you're not able to attend, like with most of our webinars, we do plan to post recording of each of those, barring any technical issues, of course. All right, so let's jump right in with a recap of Leanne's session from yesterday. So most E&M services allow you to use either time or medical decision making to choose your level of service. There are, though, a few exceptions to that. For example, critical care services use time only to select level of service, not medical decision making. So when you're using time to select your level of service, the documentation must show that you have met or exceeded the time required for that code. That time must include only time spent on the day of the encounter, and this does include both face-to-face activities and non-face-to-face activities, such as preparing to see the patient. Time does not include things like travel time, time spent on any services that are separately reported, such as a minor procedure performed during the visit and billed separately, and you would not include any teaching that is general in nature, meaning not specifically for the care of that patient. You'll want the documentation to reflect the specific amount of time spent, meaning This shouldn't be a time calculator that provides estimates on the amount of time that that encounter will take. The time spent by the practitioner should be documented in the medical record. So the documentation would not include statements like, I spent approximately 50 minutes with this patient. You want to make sure that the exact time is documented, not an approximation. You also want to stay away from rounding. For example, if the time spent is 27 minutes, don't round that up to 30 minutes. Now, notice that this is time only by the practitioner. So this would not include any time spent for activities normally performed by clinical or auxiliary staff, such as intake, administrative tasks. Maybe you have an RN or a medical assistant collecting the patient's history. You would not count that time. It is only time spent by the practitioner. So when you're using time to select your level of service, you may be able to bill for prolonged care if you meet the Medicare time requirements. Now, I say Medicare time requirements because Medicare does not follow CPT guidelines for prolonged care. So Medicare uses specific codes for prolonged care that are listed on this slide. For example, Medicare uses G2212 for prolonged office visit time, not the CPT code 99417. So now we are going to shift gears into our interactive Q&A activity. And we've designed this to be kind of a fun way to test your knowledge. So we'll launch a poll for each question. And even if you aren't 100% sure on the correct answer, we'd love to have you participate and give it your best shot. I'll give you a moment to lock in your answers, and then I'll walk through the correct answer for each question. Leanne will be adding a few reference links to the chat, and I do encourage you to have these open to help out during the activity. All right, so we will kick this off with our first question, which is, time is the only way to choose level of service for all E&M services. True or false? I'd like to start out a little on the easier side, so I see most of you are already getting the answer in and 100% are getting it correct. Give it just another minute. We still have a few answering. All right, most people have their answer in. So as it looks like most of you guessed, the answer to this one is false. Again, there are some services that allow only for time or only medical decision making. Your emergency department services are medical decision making only. Time is not used for emergency department services, as practitioners are typically taking care of multiple patients, so it would be kind of difficult to keep track of time spent on an individual patient. There are services that do not use medical decision making, which includes critical care services, discharge management, and prolonged care. You may only use time for these. We had one pre-submitted question which asked if providers can use time on most of their encounters, if that would be okay. And the answer to that is yes, if the E&M code that you're billing allows for selection by time, which most do, and your documentation supports that the total time requirement is met or exceeded, you can choose your level of service by time. You'll use whichever method is most advantageous for you. So if time gives you a higher level of service than medical decision making, then use time. If medical decision making gives you a higher level, then use medical decision making. Okay, so our next question. One moment, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Leanne, I am having a bit of a technical issue. Are you by chance able to launch the question for slide 8?
Let's see. I am.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. Hopefully slide 9
Yeah.
works, but stay tuned. Okay, so for this question, time spent may include which of the following? And you can select all that apply from these options. We have A, time spent by the billing practitioner, B, time spent by clinical staff, C, non-face-to-face time, and D, general teaching time. I'll give you just a moment to lock that answer in. Let's see, 60% of you have answers in, so give me just another moment. All right, so the answer for this one is A and C. So when counting your time to choose level of service, again, time is only by the practitioner and only on the date of the encounter. It does not include time spent by clinical staff, and you would not include things like general teaching time, travel time, or again, time that's spent on services separately reported. You can count time spent on non-face-to-face activities, such as obtaining or reviewing separately obtained history, ordering medications, documenting information in the medical record. The CPT book has a list of qualifying activities, and actually so does the first of the links in the chat for this activity. And that leads me to our next question. Okay, so this question is, which of the following are qualifying non-face-to-face activities? And you can select all that apply from these options. Is it A, discussing gardening tips with the patient's family? B, ordering medications or tests? C, documenting clinical information in the medical record? Or D, travel time? Okay, so the answer for this one is B and C, which kind of ties into what I mentioned for our last question. What I want to point out here is answer A. While it might seem a little silly, there are sometimes those situations where discussions are happening that are not related to that visit. For example, when I see my primary care doctor, who has been our family doctor for many years, we may chit chat a little bit before the visit. So maybe next week when I see her, we'll talk about the Colts' latest draft picks, since she knows I'm a big football fan. Or she might even ask about my sister in Florida because she knows my whole family. So she wouldn't count that time in the total time spent on the visit. What you are able to count for non-face-to-face activities is those on that list in the CPT book and in the CPT resource provided in the chat. So again, preparing to see the patient, you might have referring and communicating with other practitioners, or reviewing or obtaining separately obtained history. For example, maybe the practitioner needs to gather information from a spouse or maybe a child because their patient with dementia is unable to provide a reliable history. That time counts as long as it's done on the day of the encounter and is done by the practitioner. We had a pre-submitted question which asked for specifics on time documentation to support an E&M service provided with a minor procedure when the E&M service is significant and separately identifiable. So this sounds like a situation where you've provided and billed for another service or procedure the same day as a significant and separately identifiable E&M service that might be billed with modifier 25, if I'm understanding your question correctly. So you want to make sure that the documentation is clear that the time used for the E&M service does not overlap time spent on the procedure. So it could say you spent 45 minutes on the E&M service, which strictly excludes time spent on the procedure. But it's also good practice to break down how the time was spent per activity, including the procedure and all activities for the E&M, so that it clearly shows the total for the E&M does not include time spent on the procedure. So you can say total time spent for the evaluation and management was 50 minutes and included these activities. Again, it would also help to have some kind of statement that time spent on the procedure was tracked separately and is not included in the E&M calculation for time. If you use time to select your level of service, you want to make sure that it's clear for a reviewer so they know the level of service billed matches the time documented in the medical record. We had another question which also asked about strengthening documentation to note separately identifiable services and clinical staff time not included in total time. And the same thing applies here. It helps to carve out how the time was spent. You may choose to say clinical staff, or you may choose to say that time does not include clinical staff time, though that's not required. But if you have listed what activities are included in the total time, that will make it much more clear to a reviewer. Okay. For our next question, when using time to choose level of service, the documentation may include a range such as 25 to 30 minutes. True or false? All right, it looks like most of you have your answers in. The answer for this one is false. You don't want to use a range as this won't be clear on which level of service is appropriate. For example, if you have a new patient office visit and included a range of 25 to 30 minutes, well, which is it? Because if you spent 25 minutes, you might bill 99202. But if you have 30 minutes, you have enough time to bill 99203. So it really does make a difference, even in a small range like this example. You want to be sure the documentation includes the specific time, again, not a range. One pre-submitted question asked, is total time or start and stop time required for critical care, advanced care planning, and audio-only encounters? And the answer to that is your documentation should reflect the total time spent. You do not need start and stop times, but you may choose to do so, especially in cases where you have separately reported services, to really carve out the time spent on the E&M service. But again, start and stop times are not explicitly required. It also helps to document what activities are included in that time. For example, maybe you spent 15 minutes face-to-face with a patient, 5 minutes reviewing records, and another 5 minutes ordering medications. you want the time reported to be supported by the documentation. So if you have a visit for a cold or a sinus infection and it indicates 90 minutes only and nothing else, that would probably raise questions in a review. But if there's documentation showing what activities that total time includes, that can help it make more sense for a nurse reviewer. We had another pre-submitted question regarding documentation of time, which was, if WPS was reviewing an MD's note and discovered that the time statement was copied and pasted, including the minutes, how would WPS handle that? So if reviewing documentation from, let's say, multiple encounters from the same practitioner, and it becomes obvious that the time statement has just been copied and pasted into every encounter, this would probably raise a red flag. A clinical reviewer would be looking for information to support the total time documented and then used to select the level of service. And we've heard of situations like this where, for example, each record is copied or cloned and says, I spent at least 55 minutes with this patient, but then there's nothing else to support how that time was spent. This is definitely not a good practice and could ultimately result in denials, possible overpayment refunds to Medicare, and potentially further action to prevent Medicare fraud and abuse, such as further review by CERT or TPE reviews. Okay, for our next question. Sorry, it's taken me just a minute. The system is running a little bit slow. There we go. Prolonged care is not billable when using medical decision making to choose level of service. True or false? All right, the answer to this is true. Prolonged care is only billable when using time to choose your level of service. Again, keep in mind that Medicare does not follow CPT guidelines for prolonged care. I want to go out to the second of the links in the chat for this activity, which is the E&M Services Guide. Now, this might look familiar if you attended yesterday. There's a lot of great information within this guide on evaluation and management services, but what I want to focus on for this question is the information on prolonged care. So I'm going to scroll down to prolonged services listed here on page 3 in the table of contents. And from there, I can actually click on the words prolonged services, which will take me to the section of this guide dedicated to prolonged care. So the reason that I want to point out this section is for the charts here. There's this chart on page 17, which provides the exact amount of time needed to report prolonged care for office services. And then, pardon my scroll, there's this chart on page 19 that gives you that information for other types of E&M services, such as inpatient or nursing facility visits. And the reason that this is so important is, again, that Medicare does not follow CPT guidelines on prolonged care time. So if you're using time to select your level of service, make sure that you come out here to these charts to determine if you have enough time to bill Medicare for prolonged care. And these same charts are also available in the Claims Processing Manual, Chapter 12, which is the last of the links in the chat for this activity. Actually, I'm going to show you that real quick. So here, I'm going to go down to page 3 in the table of contents, and I'll click on section 30.6.15 for the section on prolonged services. And you can see at the top of this next page that there's the office services chart for the time requirements. And then if I scroll down to the next page, there's the requirements for other types of prolonged care. Again, these are the same charts, so it's a matter of preference. My preference is the E&M services guide that we looked at first, perhaps because it's more colorful, I don't know. But as far as these charts are concerned, they contain the exact same information. Okay, let's move back to the presentation. Feel free to keep those open though if you are following along. They will come in handy for some of our questions later in the activity. So moving on to our next question, which is critical care services use only time to select level of service. True or false? All right, just another minute. It looks like about 50% of you have your answers in. Okay, so the answer for this one is true. Critical care is billed with code 99291 for the first 30 to 74 minutes and 99292 for each additional 30 minutes. Medical decision making is not used to select level of service for critical care. Only time is used. For our next question, emergency department services use only time to select level of service. True or false? All right, we're at about 50%. We'll do just another moment. Okay, the answer for this one is false. And I think I mentioned this earlier in the activity. Emergency department services do not use time for level of service. The CPT book tells us that these services are typically provided on a variable intensity basis involving multiple encounters with several patients over an extended period of time, making it difficult for physicians to provide accurate time estimates for emergency department services. So only medical decision making is used for emergency department services. You will not use time for those. All right, for the next question, time used for choosing level of service may be counted from which of the following? Is it A, day of the encounter only, B, the day before and the day of the encounter, C, day before, day of, and day after the encounter, or D, day of and day after the encounter? All right. So the answer for this is A, day of the encounter only. So when counting time to choose your level of service, you are able to count both face-to-face and non-face-to-face activities, but only those that are done on the day of the encounter. And that brings me to our next question, which is prolonged care time may only be counted on the date of the encounter for E&M nursing facility visits. True or false? Looks like we're kind of split down the middle on answering this one. I'm going to give it just another moment. Okay, so the answer for this one is false. I'm going to go back to the charts on prolonged care time to see why this is false. And I'm going to go back to the E&M services guide. So here's that chart on prolonged care services for anything other than office or outpatient visits. For nursing facility visits, we have the prolonged care code G0317, and you must have at least 95 minutes for an initial nursing facility visit or 85 minutes for a subsequent visit in order to bill prolonged care. That time may be counted one day before the visit, the day of the visit, and 3 days after. So what does this mean exactly? Well, when counting time to choose your level of service, you count only on the date of service, but time for prolonged care may be counted the day before, the day of, and up to 3 days after for nursing facility visits. So maybe you have 90 minutes on the day of an initial nursing facility visit, so a 99306, but the day before the visit, the practitioner spent 10 minutes, let's say, reviewing test results in preparation for the following day's visit. Well, that gives you 100 minutes and enough time to bill prolonged care with code G0317. All right. So for our next question, we have, which of these codes use time only, not medical decision making, to select level of service? You can select all that apply from these. Is it A, 99291, B, 99238, C, 99285, or D, 99205? I'll give it just another moment or so. I think this one might take a little bit longer to find those answers. Okay. The answer for this is A and B. So 99291 is a critical care code, and we already talked about that code, which is time only. 99238 is a discharge management code for 30 minutes, so this is a time only code. For the other two answer options here, 99285 is an emergency department visit, which again is medical decision making only. And then 99205 is an office visit code, which you can select by either time or medical decision making. We had a pre-submitted question which asked, in what scenarios time-based coding is more advantageous than medical decision making? And that's really going to depend on your documentation, but maybe you have a visit where a significant amount of time was spent counseling the patient and their family, and time ends up giving you a higher level of service than medical decision making. Or maybe care coordination for one patient takes quite a bit of time, and medical decision making gives you a lower level of service than time. So it is beneficial to look at both time and medical decision making in any case and determine which is most advantageous. Okay, our next question is, which of the following codes are not used to bill Medicare for prolonged care time? You can select all that apply from these options. So we have A, G2212, B, 99417, C, G0316, or D, 99418. We've still got a few more getting their answers in. Okay. The answer for this one is B and D. Again, you want to refer to the charts and the resources that I showed you with the Medicare specific codes for prolonged care. Medicare does not use the CPT codes 99417 and 99418 for prolonged care. All right, our next question is, prolonged care may not be reported with which of the following E&M services? Is it A, inpatient visits, B, critical care services, C, office services, or D, home visits? Okay, I think most everybody has their answers in. The answer to this one is B, critical care services. And this is outlined in the E&M services guide, which tells us that prolonged care may not be billed with critical care or emergency department services. Okay, for our next question, we have a scenario. If a provider is billing an office visit with 77 minutes total, which is the appropriate combination for time spent on this visit? And let's assume that this is a new patient office visit. That's not listed on the slide, but assume that this is a new patient visit. Is it A, 99204 and G2212, B, 99205 and G2212, C, 99205, or D, 2 units of G2212? See, so far the answer's coming in. It looks like we're kind of split down the middle again on this one. Give it just another moment. Okay. So for this one, the answer is C, 1 unit of 99205. So if we go back to that chart in the E&M Services Guide, I'm going to scroll back up to page 17. 99205 is used for the highest level of new patient office visits with at least 60 minutes. In order to bill prolonged care for Medicare, you would need at least 89 minutes. So in our scenario for this question, with 77 minutes, we do not have enough time to bill prolonged care to Medicare, according to this chart. So for this next question, a provider is billing an initial nursing facility visit with 97 minutes total. Which is the appropriate combination for time spent on this visit? Is it A, 99306 and G0317, B, 99306 and G0318, C, just 99306, or D, 99310 and 2 units of service for G0317? I'll give you a little more time on this one. I think this is another that might take a minute or two to look at. Okay. For this one, A is correct. They would bill the initial nursing facility E&M visit 99306 and 1 unit of service for prolonged care time G0317. So you want to make sure that you're billing not only the correct code for your E&M service, but also the appropriate prolonged care code to go along with that. G0317 may be billed when you have prolonged care time for an initial or subsequent nursing facility visit. And according to our chart, you must have at least 95 minutes total in order to report prolonged care time with your initial nursing facility visits. So 97 minutes in our example is enough time to bill prolonged care to Medicare. All right, a couple more questions left. Our next question is, time spent interpreting test results does not count towards time in choosing level of service. True or false? The answer for this one is false, but this can be tricky. You can count time spent interpreting test results as long as that is not separately reported. You don't want to double dip, so to speak. So if you're billing for the professional component of a chest x-ray, for example, you would not count the time spent for independent interpretation of that chest x-ray. All right, last one. For our last question, charts identifying the prolonged time required for each category of evaluation and management services may be found in which resource? Is it A, the Program Integrity Manual, Chapter 3, B, the Claims Processing Manual, Chapter 12, C, the WPS website, or D, Medicare.gov? We've got about 40% of the answers in. I'm going to give it just another moment. All right. So for this one, the answer is B, the Claims Processing Manual, Chapter 12. While all of these resources contain a lot of really useful information, the charts referenced in the question are the Claims Processing Manual, Chapter 12, which we took a quick look at earlier. Remember, we also spent some time in the E&M Services Guide, which has that section on prolonged services and also includes these same charts. And I keep both of these saved as a favorite, meaning both the E&M Services Guide and the Claims Processing Manual, Chapter 12. Aside from the CPT book, these are the resources that I use most often for E&M services. Here we've included your resources. First is the E&M Services Guide. This is really all things evaluation and management, and we went out there a few times today. Next, the Claims Processing Manual, Chapter 12. Section 30.6 is all about E&M services, and it also has the prolonged care time charts in there, which we looked at. And then lastly, we have a page on our website which has a short article on documentation for E&M services under a TPE review. All right, now I'll check in with Leanne. Leanne, do we have any unanswered questions in the chat?
Ashley, we do not have any unanswered questions in the chat.
All right, fantastic. If you do think of any additional questions, you have 7 days from today to submit those. And you'll send those to our education mailbox. And make sure to include the title of this webinar in the subject line, or you could just say level of service using time, something to that effect, so they know that those need to come to Leanne and I. Please keep in mind that we are not able to access any claims history, so you will want to contact customer service for any claims related questions. In a few minutes, you will receive an email to thank you for attending, and you don't want to delete that one without reading it. The email contains your certificate of achievement, so it will have your name and contact hours if you need to turn it in for credit towards continuing education units. If you do not receive the email, a few things may have happened. First, you may want to check your spam or junk folder. Also, be sure to add messenger@webex.com to your safe sender list so that any future messages will show up in your inbox. Also, if you joined by phone only, you would not have received this email as there's not a way for us to capture your email systematically from the attendance record. But no need to worry. If you joined by phone, you are able to email us with the phone number you joined with to request that certificate of attendance. And Leanne will be adding that email address to the chat. All right, please take a few minutes to complete the survey. You can tell us what you liked, what we can do better, and suggest topics for future education. You have a couple different ways to take the survey. You can use the link in the chat, or when you exit today, you'll be prompted to go to an external site, and that external site is the CMS Qualtrics page. The prompt will look kind of like the picture we have shown here with a little yellow triangle, and we included that image on the top right of the slide so that you know this is safe. It's not malware or anything like that. For those listening through the website or through YouTube, you also have that same opportunity to provide feedback. You will have a survey card at the end of the presentation, or you can scroll to the end to see that link, and that's also available in the video description. All right, that does conclude our webinar. It was really exciting to see all the participation today. We very much appreciate you joining us and participating in our activity. On behalf of myself, Leanne, and all of Provider Outreach, we thank you for taking the time to join us. We look forward to your survey feedback, and we hope to see you again at future events. Everyone have a great afternoon. You may now disconnect.